I just don't like to be inside. Being outside is freedom, just to be able to see the flowers and the green grass. You know, when I got home, first thing I did is kiss that ground of mine in the front yard. I hadn't been outside but 3 times for 3 hours. I think the mind can only take you so much.
Mark McAlister was born and raised in Greenfield, Tennessee, a town of 2,078 people where the slogan is, "You won't get lost in the shuffle." He met Crystal in 1985. The two married and had 3 kids. Mark is the kind of guy who always says, "Yes, sir," "No, ma'am." The kind of guy who insists on opening the door for you. The kind of guy who's never met a stranger. In Greenfield, everyone seems to know him, and most go to his church, where he leads prayer groups and drives the bus on Sundays. Mark has been a police officer, a gravedigger, and a construction foreman, often at the same time. Crystal was a hairstylist, and their family mostly lived paycheck to paycheck. In 2005, a friend of his was working as a contractor in Iraq. He encouraged Mark to try it.
And by that time, I was working 2 or 3 different jobs anyway. And I thought I could work one job, make the same kind of money as I did at home. Thought it'd help pay the college tuition and make a better life for my family. And the income was pretty good income. It wasn't a war zone. It was dangerous. You know, everybody was in agreement with it, thought it'd be okay for a year, maybe 2 at the most, but it actually went 10 years.
Mark begins work as a private defense contractor. He travels to 14 different countries, helping build military bases, roads, and equipment buildings. Mark supervises construction projects in Afghanistan, Iraq, and elsewhere in the Middle East.
I liked it. It just kind of grew on you. You'd hear sirens go off and, you know, mortars and rockets be coming in. You'd go to the bunker. The thrill of not knowing what could happen, it was really addicting.
Most of the time he'd be gone 6 months, come home for 2 weeks. You know, the longer he would stay, the more time he would get home with family.
You just fall into that where you get used to them coming and picking them up, being excited, spending a couple of weeks, and then you take them back to the airport and then you get back on with your life. But you don't think about the danger. As the years went by, it just left your mind. It was just work, and when he's going back to work.
He left his first time the day before my 11th birthday. And it don't matter how old I got. 17, 18 years old in high school, still every time we'd take him, it'd be tears.
In 2014, Mark is hired as a quality control manager for Advanced C4 Solutions, a private military contractor based in Florida. AC4S has a contract with the U.S. State Department to maintain and operate a hotel in Yemen's capital city, Sana'a. The Sheraton Hotel will be used as secure lodging for embassy personnel.
Our job was to upgrade security, just make it safe for people at all times being in there. And about 2 weeks after we got there, the Houthis had invaded the country. They started spray painting on the walls, you know, "Death to America, death to Israel." They shot up one of our vehicles, and that was the first encounter of a problem.
Mark and his team are evacuated. On Christmas Eve, Mark flies back to Yemen, but the violence continues to escalate. And in February of 2015, U.S. Marines and U.S. personnel are evacuated from Yemen as the Houthis take control of the country. Operations at the hotel were suspended.
Yemen has been kind of on the back burner of the American media conscience for a long time now. Yemen is basically a new theater in a Cold War that's been going on between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And there's a lot of tension, religious, military tension between those two countries. There is a history of Iran supporting the Houthis in their attempt to win a civil war with the Yemeni government. By the time 2014 and 2015 rolled around, the Houthis were actually winning the civil war in that country. This was the equivalent of Saudi Arabia's Cuban Missile Crisis.
The UN continues to operate in the country. U.S. government officials allow the UN to use diplomatic facilities, including the Sheraton Hotel. In August, the State Department authorizes AC-4S to return to Yemen to complete their work. In October, Mark travels to Yemen with John Heyman. John's job is security. He's a former Bronze Star Sergeant with too many awards to fit into one box on his discharge papers. In the Army, he deployed to Bosnia, Somalia, Afghanistan, and Iraq. At home, he's a father to 7 children. On October 20th, Mark and John take a 30-minute flight from Africa to Yemen.
John and I traveled that day, and of course that day I got sick. Didn't really feel good, couldn't wait to get there. There were 7 people on the flight. We landed on the tarmac, could see the hotel manager there. I remember walking up to the podium there. The guy looked at me like, "Are you crazy?" He didn't smile, didn't even really frown. He just looked at me like I was lost. As I was waiting there, John walked up and he said, "What's going on?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." I said, "I guess they're checking the roster." But as I said that, I noticed the other people from the UN was walking up and they checked their passport and they went on through the door. It was not an issue. The man was still on the phone talking. He'd hang it up and he'd talk again. He'd get another call. He says, "Let's go over here to the corner." He started going through my bag. I noticed, and I said, "Man, this don't look good." I'm just thinking to myself. When I looked around, I heard a sound. Here pulls this white van, just like you see in the movies. And I'm looking. This guy is covered from head to toe. All you see is eyes. 2 more guys got out with AKs, followed him over. And when they come in, they told me to turn around. I said, "Why?" Started tying my hands behind my back. He said something in Arabic, and he was looking for something to blindfold me with. He couldn't tell, so he grabbed the mask off the soldier and he chucked it off his face. And he put it around my head and tied it up close, and he stuck cotton, up into my eyes. And at that point, I knew me and John was in trouble. I knew we was in a situation that I'd never been in before. And I could hear John saying, "You're not tying me up." And John, I could hear a type him backing up. I could hear a scuffle, kind of yelling and stuff. And I says, "John, just comply to their demands. We'll sort this out. We'll figure it out." I remember getting into the van, and John got beside me, and he actually got his hands untied. He says, "Can you get your hands untied?" I said, "I'll try." I remember they did it like a figure 8. And then I says, "John," I said, "I can't get my hands undone. I can't get them apart." I remember I started counting, trying to feel which way we turned, and, not knowing if anyone was in front of us, not knowing if anybody was behind us, just didn't know. It took 20 minutes to get from the airport to where we were at. And they took us up to this room and they stood us up against the wall and they turned the lights on. They said, "Remove your belt, remove your shirts and your shoes." John took off his watch, took off his shoes, took his belt. I remember him taking off his wedding ring. And he said, "My wife's gonna kill me." This guy looked at me laughing and gave me a mattress. And he opened this door. I went in this little black room that was 12 by 9.5. They shut the door. I said, God, what just happened?
More than 8,000 miles away, Crystal receives a phone call. AC-4S says Mark and John have been delayed in transit. They ask for documentation to prove their work history. The next phone call is more urgent. Her husband has been captured, and no one knows where he is.
I don't remember anything the day I was told that he was captured. That part of my life is just like a dark hole that I can't recall, can't go back to.
Started studying everything I could about Yemen. Studied every one of their prisons, talking to anybody that I could that could give me information. That's all I did. I stayed up for days at a time, just do what I thought I had to do.
I went in this little black room that was dingy, dirty, dark, even during the day, pitch black at night. You can't even see the hand in front of your face. I still didn't know who had me or what I was doing. And I could hear them filling up buckets. Thought they was going to waterboard me. But I didn't know what they was going to do. Shoot you, cut your head off. I didn't want to be a YouTube video. You'd be sleeping in the middle of the night when you could sleep, and they'd come by with a piece of iron and they'd hit it. And it'd just be like someone scaring you, it'd just jar you. Not only would they do that, but you had the Saudis bombing Yemen continuously. And I could feel the concussion in the floor. I remember one time I was just so sick of it, I said, God, please, let them drop one right here. I didn't care anymore. I got to that point where I didn't care. Their interrogations got a little longer and I was getting weaker. Couldn't even hold my pants up anymore by that time. So I quit eating. I says, I'll just take myself out.
After 21 days by himself, Mark gets a cellmate. Dr. Abdul Qadir Al-Gundi is kidnapped 6 weeks before Mark and John. The doctor is arrested for protesting the Houthis on Twitter.
They took me from my cell and threw me into Mark's cell.
I says, where am I at? And he says, oh, you're an American. He says, you're in an Al-Qaeda prison. I said, so this is not ISIF. He said, oh, no, this is Houthi rebels and Yemen soldiers. I said, well, what do they want? He said, you're very, very valuable. He said, they will want to trade you.
I mean, they love to blackmail the Americans. I mean, you are a God-sent victim.
In 2015, the Houthis took 6 American citizens hostage. These Americans were not military soldiers. They were journalists, construction managers, and teachers. Mark hasn't seen John since the first night. He goes on a hunger strike. It's all he can think to do. But the doctor convinces him to eat.
I lived with Mark in one cell for 3 months. He was already starting to deteriorate himself. This isolation, this darkness, this bad food, this uncertainty is torture.
You imagine, you only have 9.5 feet, so that was your space, and you had about that much room in between you. And you gotta remember, there's cockroaches in there, and you're laying on the floor, and there's mosquitoes coming through them pipes. Up at the top, there was no light, and the doctor would later on tell me why, because one of the prisoners said, well, heck, a man could hang himself with the wiring. So they took all the lights out. It just reminded me of a tomb.
Dr. Al-Gundi treats prisoners throughout the compound. He sees firsthand what this militia is capable of. The guards tie up one man and drag him down the stairs. It leaves him paralyzed. The doctor often hears them talking about other Americans.
Mark was one of those who I think broke. He was terribly angry all the time, and he started to shout, 2 fists against the wall, and he makes you afraid.
As the heat started increasing, I started getting anxiety attacks. And then I started getting claustrophobic. I'd start walking, I started getting vocal and louder. It happened so quickly that I would run over to the door and jump on the door. I would beat that door. I remember my knuckles bleeding, cutting my arm, getting cut. I don't know how on that door. You didn't feel the pain, you just did it.
I have seen some people hallucinating. I have seen some people banging their heads on the door. I have seen people hiding, covering their head, crying. Just imagine a grown-up man think what his mother is thinking about him now. They don't know. Your family don't know what happened to you. They don't know if you are still alive or dead.
I remember Mom was standing behind the couch, being in tears, asking me, what are we going to do? I had no clue. I had no answers. There's nothing I could do to help. There's nothing I could do, nothing I could say. It's just one of those things where you just you sit there in silence and you suffer, you watch your family suffer. Honestly, there was just no help, nothing at all.
I didn't even go to work. I let my business, I just wound up closing my business. It was like you were in another reality or something. It's hard to explain.
And then, of course, as time went on, we were just kind of starting to, think, okay, we're going to have to just assume now that he's probably been killed, and what's next?
We were in a prison just like he was. We just didn't know his fate.
Every day, Mark is interrogated. And each time, he asks about John. Handcuffed to the doctor, he is taken outside 3 times. In the yard, he asks the other prisoners about John, and the doctor translates. They say he's on a different floor. As Mark deteriorates, the doctor asks to be moved to another cell.
The pipe was at the top of the room, 2 inches from the top. And as the sun would rise, the circle would get bigger. It'd cascade a light on the wall. I could imagine that being a cross. And I'd sit there and I'd pray. And think about home and think about them. And it gave me hope, And then I would get up and I'd walk from one corner of the room to the other. Then I started doing push-ups. And I'd start out with about 10 push-ups. I was still weak, but I could tell I was getting stronger. And over a period of time, I was up to 1,025 push-ups a day. Probably about the 5th month, they gave me my Bible. And even though I couldn't read it, they took my glasses away. After they exchanged prisoners in there and put another different prisoner in with me, I talked them in reading the New Testament to me.
Mark's hair grows long and his beard reaches his chest. One of the guards says he reminds him of his father. The guard prints out a photo of Mark and Crystal and gives it to Mark. He keeps it in his Bible. On March 10th, 142 days after his capture, Mark is allowed to call his wife.
I had gotten a call, another early call from the State Department saying, be ready, we think he's fixing to call you. Well, they had told me that many times before, and he didn't call. 5 minutes later, the phone rang. It was a 00000 number, all zeros. And I thought, that's him.
So I started talking to her. I said, you listen to me. I am in a Al-Qaeda prison. I am doing fine and I am well.
I started crying. Oh, it was wonderful.
That was the first proof of me actually being alive.
Mark learns to tell time by the prisoner's prayers, and he keeps track of the days by scratching notches into the wall with his belt.
I started at the bottom of the floor with my marks. When I woke up, I'd mark a new day. And when I left, I was up to almost to my shoulders.
After 6 months, Mark is moved. He is blindfolded in the middle of the night and driven to a new prison. 10 days later, the guards tell him he's going home. He doesn't believe them.
I was scared. I'm not going to tell you I wasn't. I was scared to death. He blindfolded me, handcuffed me, went out the door, And for the fourth time in 6 months and 11 days, I felt the warmth of the sun on me. It was morning. I looked down, I was standing beside a vehicle, and it had Toyota on it. And we started driving. I says, are they trading me to ISIF? Are they trading me to Al-Qaeda? Are they taking me to kill me? What? I mean, I didn't know. I didn't trust and believe them. Drove through a city, and I looked out. Anyone from 7 to 70 had an AK-47. It was unbelievable. I said, good gracious, it's going to be by the grace of God that I get home.
After 10 hours, the Houthi convoy pulls up to a yellow barricade. Mark is in pain, knees tucked underneath him in the middle seat. They will not let him out of the SUV. There are soldiers on both sides of the fence. Mark still isn't sure if he's going home.
Here come 2 soldiers from that side. And the Saudi raised up his cell phone. He pushed a button. He said, my name is so-and-so with the diplomatic security. Mr. McAlister, you walk across the border with this man. I got out of the car. I do not remember walking 40 yards to the border. I looked behind me, and all those, I think it was about, total was 7 vehicles of Houthis gone. And for the first time, I felt I was free. It was like,
Saudi Arabian officials run a metal detector across his arms, legs, and chest. They're looking for explosive devices. Then, they drive to the hospital where 2 doctors examine him. 2 hours later, at a restaurant near the border, Mark is greeted by FBI agents.
he said, Mr. McAlister, we want you to know before you hear it from anyone else or anybody else that Mr. Heyman was murdered and tortured to death and has passed away. I just couldn't believe it. And he had to repeat it again to me. I was still like it threw me in shock again.
John has a whole life before that. It's not who he was. It's just how he died. And there's little itsy bitsy John. This is him just a little bit older.
John grew up in Cincinnati, idolizing his father who served in Vietnam. His sister called him Rambo, and John joined the Army when he was 18.
Ever since we were little kids, he's always just had this love for the military. And I remember how annoying it was all the time with him digging holes in the backyard, and it looked like somebody was going to have war the next day.
I asked him one time, what are you doing? And he told me, I'm building foxholes, I never had to build one, when I was in Vietnam, we had bunkers, but at any rate. But he was a loving son, and
I think we always knew he was going to be in the military, huh, Dad? John and I were super tight because we were only 18 months apart. So we kind of just did everything together growing up. He was just always a good brother, always protective. We look like a couple, not siblings. That's when he first joined the military, how clean cut he was. That's when John was in basic training.
John met his wife Jennifer while stationed at Fort Bragg in North Carolina. They married after 2 weeks, and he served in the Army for 22 years.
John always sent us pictures of him in tanks. He wrote me, "Your big brother in Somalia, late October 1993, preparing for a convoy. Convoys were always hot, dusty, and sometimes nerve-wracking."
I'm First Sergeant John Hamen. I'm in Mosul, Iraq. I'd just like to say hi to my wife, Jennifer, and my 7 kids. And I hope that you're all doing well. Happy Thanksgiving. I love you. I miss you, and I'll see you soon.
He was just such a good dad. He was the main provider for those 7 kids all those years, and that's a lot. He wasn't at home as much, I think, as he wanted to be, but his service was important to him. And the men that were under him were important to him. They were family.
John retired from the Army so he could spend more time with his family. His first job was selling communication equipment to the military, but he quickly realized he wasn't cut out for a desk job. One of his superiors in the Army was now at AC-4S, and he hired John to be a security liaison at the hotel in Yemen.
He told me it was top secret, and I just told him to be safe. And I was worried about, I was kind of worried about it, and he said it'd be okay, and that was it. And that was the last time I spoke to him, actually. Yeah, so.
I remember telling John, this is the best contract I've ever been on. Money's good. Living quarters are great. You're in a hotel. You got a pool, you got tennis courts, you got a weight room. And then we get kidnapped and he ends up losing his life.
At first I wasn't even really that worried because they said they had detained John and they're looking for documentation. I thought, well, I just thought that was not even a big deal. And I don't think I even comprehended it until Dad called and told me that he was dead. I still thought it was over paperwork.
His wife called me, and told me someone else didn't want to talk to you. And then some gentleman came on, and he said, it's for the State Department, take us,
Yeah, they kind of broke it to him in the hardest way you possibly can.
It kind of like set me back, it just set me back. Even when they said you're going home, and the first thing I thought of, what about John? That's the first thing I asked him when he said that. They said, well, we've got more questions for John before we can let him go. And I thought, man, we don't leave nobody behind. He was doing it all for them, definitely for his wife and his children. You could tell he was a good father.
Mark turns 57 at a hospital in Germany. After his release, he spends several days there. He seems to be doing okay, but a doctor warns him, you'll never be the same. Finally, at an airport in Memphis, Mark is reunited with his family. He makes it home before Christian's college graduation.
A lot of joy, seeing him and finally getting to hug him and, give him a kiss and tell him you love him, in person.
I could see in their eyes that they had tears, but not only tears of joy, but the tears of what I looked like.
He didn't look like himself. If I hadn't known and been looking for him, if I'd just seen him passing on the street, I might not have even known who he was.
When he came back, he looked like he was 80, 90 years old, where he was just so thin and fragile. Even the smallest clothes just looked like it would fall off of him. The town lined up, waving, welcoming him home, but his PTSD was so bad. The fire trucks honking and the lights and the people and the attention. He had to get out of there. He was just like, we got to get home.
We tried to get back to normal life as quick as possible. Even though we'd been together for 30 years, we were learning each other again.
It was difficult. I didn't sleep good whatsoever. And I woke up yelling at times. Felt like I was still there. This went on for a long time, and maybe from the PTSD, I guess.
TV was always quiet. TV bothered him, being loud, the volume. I remember one time he's on the bench press. He's benching, all of a sudden he just racks the weight and just sits up and walks away and just starts crying.
I figure I could try to make myself better, Quitting to me then wasn't an option, and I figured if I can go through what I went through in Yemen, I know I can get through this.
It's changed him. He's definitely a changed man all around in every aspect.
Mark and John's families take legal action. They sue Iran in 2016 because Iran trained and supported the Houthis, helping turn them into the violent militia they had become.
When we meet a victim of terrorism, that person, all they know is that they have a substantial loss in their life. And they don't know how to quantify it. They can't possibly imagine that they have a civil claim against a foreign country. That doesn't make sense initially.
The Houthis abducted hundreds of people in Yemen, but the American was a high-value target.
They basically kidnapped as many Americans as they could after they took over the country.
We know what happened, how Mark was delivered. They were bribed with millions. But of course, the Americans, by mandates, by Congress resolutions, the Americans can't pay for blackmail, but they ask their friends in the Middle East to pay for them.
The amount of money is impossible to verify. The State Department declined an interview request for this story. But the doctor overhears guards bragging about the Americans they captured. And the guards tell him they will get something for them, just like they had before. Because the Houthis understand this. Private contractors don't end up on the front page of the New York Times.
I think a lot of people's unfortunate reaction to cases like this is prejudice towards private contractors. I don't think that any amount of money that Mark or John were paid in order to do that job turns them into mercenaries who shouldn't be mourned when they're lost, serving the foreign policy goals of our government in exactly the same way that U.S. soldiers would be.
Sadly, on their part, once you go over there, it's like you take the chance that if something happens, you're on your own. They don't help.
They were not given the appropriate security and support given the situation. I don't really think that that's arguable, to be perfectly honest.
First thing that came to my mind, wasn't there a backup? That's what I'm saying, being an ex-Army,
When United States Marines are evacuated because it's not safe in the country for them, and then 2 U.S. contractors are sent in unarmed and unescorted, that tells the story all on its own.
An autopsy is performed when John's body is flown back to the United States. His lawyers say he tried to escape. They say there was a struggle, and he was killed. They say the Houthis dropped his body off at the hospital as a warning. We still have another American.
It appears that the Houthis may have panicked after they killed him. We don't know exactly what happened to lead to his death. We presented evidence from a medical examiner who looked at the autopsy and did conclude that he was killed by homicide.
I saw that firsthand on the coroner's report. The doctors that examined him, he had contusions and a concussion, broken ribs, and lacerations all over his body where he'd been beaten and strangled.
The thing that bothers me the most is what he was thinking those last few minutes. Because at some point he had to know that it was going to be over and what was going to happen to his children. What I want people to know is that he sacrificed a lot and he's not here anymore. And that does bother me a lot because he was like my twin for so many years. And I just hope my mom was with him and the angels were around him and he didn't know what was happening. Because that's a horrible way to die.
You sometimes, you sometimes think, well, what if I could have got my hands untied, What would this scenario been like? Who knows? He died a hero, doing what a soldier does for his country.
America is not at war with the Houthis, and America is not at war with Iran. But ever since the September 11th terrorist attacks, our presence in the Middle East has had wide-reaching consequences. consequences that aren't always easy to see and widely understood. For this lawsuit, Crystal testifies Mark was going to be discussed during global peace talks involving the United Nations. Because for the Houthis, and by extension Iran, an American hostage was a bargaining chip. An American hostage was leverage, and it was the sign of a power shift, where America is losing and Iran is winning.
There's a document that we use, and it's the United States Army's retrospective report on the U.S. involvement in Iraq. And the last paragraph of that report includes a sentence that has haunted me through all of these cases. The primary victor in that conflict was an expansionist and emboldened Iran. The idea that we might be losing conflicts to the Iranians in multiple theaters across the Middle East, despite the fact that we don't have open warfare against them, is something that's not talked about often.
Iran has a project, has an aim, and that aim is an expansion. They stir certain groups, and after that they finance them, they educate them, they nurture them, they arm them, and they have unleashed these militias on us. There is no hope.
In Yemen, at least 5 million people are on the brink of starvation. Since the civil war began, 10,000 children have been killed or injured. The UN calls it the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, and with the Houthis in power, it can feel hopeless.
Breaking news now, Saudi Arabia forces are targeting Yemen in a series of deadly airstrikes. The latest one happened at a prison run by Houthi rebels. The Red Cross says rescuers are still going through the site to search for anyone who survived.
From that point on, from October 20, 2015, just our lives had changed. It made my children grow up a lot.
Definitely not the same family, that we were prior to the incident. The events that took place led up to where we're at in life today. It's ruined his family.
Tears your world apart. Even if they come home and they're fine, things happen.
I knew she was frantically looking for me, trying to get information. That took a toll on her. I'm sure not knowing whether I was dead or alive. I'm sure that would do anything to anybody. She'd come to church. They would always ask her, what about Mark? And everywhere she went, she'd hear that. She couldn't even go to the supermarket because she would have to be bombarded with questions, people on Facebook, people calls. And she admitted to turning to alcohol to try to get it out of her mind.
I knew things would never be the same. We divorced, and I think about that every day.
I can't imagine, how bad she suffered. I truly do believe that if he would not have been captured, then my parents would still be married together.
A federal judge rules in Mark and John's favor. Mark is awarded $20.7 million, and Jen is awarded $36 million. Because they sued Iran, it is unlikely they will ever receive all of their money.
These cases keep getting filed. I've seen this process help people complete that grieving cycle in some healthy way. But at the same time, you're going to wake up the next day and nothing's going to be different. It's real for them every day. They wake up, without their dad there. That's a hard reality.
Dad saw this card and remembered how I used to watch you shave and tell you how I couldn't wait till I could shave too. You told me not to be in such a hurry to grow up. You were so right. I hate shaving every day. Thanks, Dad. Happy Father's Day. Love your son, John. Some of the things I kept, and this is a special thing for me. He loved his country and he was proud to serve, gave his life. For the country, and he sacrificed a lot, being absent from home, That's why I'm so proud of him. So he was a good son.
Oh, I think about John every day, yeah. I still have the conversation that we had the day before we left on my phone where we were talking.
I know that there are nights I'm sure that he's still suffering. He's still affected by it today, 6 years later. Even still, I haven't been told everything. The only time I've ever heard his story is at churches. He'd go and give his testimony, of how, Jesus Christ got him through it. But as far as me and him just sitting down and talking about it, not once.
To this very day, when I wake up, first thing I do is raise my hands up to heaven and say, thank you, God, for another day of life. Thank you for bringing me home. I just don't want to miss anything else because I miss so much. Just to look at four walls for over 6.5 months and smell the same old smell, life stopped. Everything else kept moving, but you're just there, like you don't even exist. Well, that is a tattoo of an eagle with an American flag, and that's a tribute to John Heyman III.